I think that the case was made. It's basically a summation of what we've heard, the evidence that we've heard. It's basically a summation, and it puts in bold relief just the lies, deceit, deception that not only has come from Darren Wilson, but from every element of the state up to now. I think that includes, obviously, McCullough, but anyone going through the transcripts will see that all of the prosecutors did everything possible to facilitate the story that Darren Wilson would tell. And not only did the prosecutors do it, the witnesses who were police did the same thing. And in some sections of the testimony and the transcripts, you can see frustration on the part of the prosecutor because the police witness wouldn't say the right thing. And they would go back over and over again to push the answer that they wanted that would help to validate the story that Darren Wilson told to them. So they created a narrative to justify the murder of Mike Brown. And I think this grand jury will come to that conclusion just based on the evidence that we've seen up to now.
Someone asked the question, what happened to the slogan, or what happened to the thought of protect and serve? Where is the protection in protect and serve?
I think Brother O'Malley Yesateli just laid it out early on in his opening statements. To serve and protect is to serve and protect the state and the privileged, super rich of this society. That's the bottom line. It's never intended to serve and protect the masses of the people. It's to contain the people. You know, on the question of black people waking up, there's great different periods of history where our community have surged forward to deal with the social issues. And I believe this is one of another defining moments where a number of people who have began to see what is real out here, and that's evidenced by the youth leadership that's been arising, that's manifested by the countless demonstrations of the people that's out here in the community, as well as the conversation that's taking place in our community. The key thing is, how do we galvanize that into a force that can bring about the kind of change that needs to occur?
I'd just like to speak briefly to that, because sometimes I think that question is one that has its basis in really not understanding the history of our people. To ask the question, when will black people wake up, makes an assumption that somehow black people went to sleep. But what I would tell you is that we've experienced 2 generations of African people who have been without the benefit of revolutionary leadership, not because black people went to sleep, but because Uncle Sam put them to sleep. That Malcolm X was murdered, Martin Luther King was murdered, members of the Black Panther Party, all of our revolutionary organizations destroyed. And in the place of these revolutionary organizations and leadership, what we've seen is a substitute, a false kind of leadership that did not serve the interests of the people, and whose purpose it was to keep struggle suppressed, to keep the people from struggling, who occasionally would take advantage of an incident such as what occurred here in Ferguson, the execution of somebody, lead a march, go someplace and pray, and then allow people an opportunity to vent and then send them home. The thing that happened in Ferguson that was critically significant is that it didn't stop. The sustained resistance in Ferguson, I will never be able to overstate the significance of those young Africans, working class African people who rose up. And I want to put emphasis on working class because they weren't just because they were young. These are people who are victimized every day of their lives. These are the ones, when you talk about in New York where 850,000 people were stopped by the police in a single year, those are the types of people who were stopped. Those are the people who can't walk down the street without the cops rolling up on them and rolling over their feet. This is a regular feature of their existence. And that's who rose up. It wasn't Sharpton. You understand? It was the people who are victimized, and they rose up and they refused to stop. And because they refused to stop, what happened was America was forced to expose itself before the world. And so you had tanks in the streets, and you had, just the most vicious kind of repression that was unleashed on the people, and it still didn't stop. And therefore, African people throughout this country saw in Ferguson, the heroism of black people here was something that raised the morale of black people all around this country. And what it did was it contributed to a collective kind of consciousness, because Mike Brown's is happening in every place in this country all the time. But that resistance put it out before the whole world. And so we achieved a kind of collective consciousness. It wasn't just something that happened in Ferguson on Canfield Drive. It was something that happened for every African in this country and around the world. That was ours. They knew his name. They knew his name. It wasn't just somebody who the police killed, all right? They knew Canfield Drive. This was something that happened, and so you had a collective consciousness emerging. And what we have is a sort of concentration, a condensed time, where we've gone 2 generations of young people having no experience in struggle. The most intense struggle they've been in is Facebook, liking this, liking that, etc. No struggle. And then suddenly this thing is upon us, and this rising consciousness, and we see this leap in consciousness almost overnight. What would have taken 10, 15 years now, boom, in 4 months. You've seen a certain kind of leap and radicalization of the community. You live here, so you don't know how it is here. You really don't. It's like when you have somebody, you live in a house with somebody with bad feet, you sort of get used to how it smells, and you have to go out and come back in to really get a sense of it. But something powerful has occurred here, and Ferguson has functioned as an incubator for resistance throughout this country. And we've seen happen in a very brief period of time, just a radicalization of the people, and it's not going to go away. And I want to say this because I think we make a serious mistake when we attribute it just to young, being youthful. Because young don't make you militant, doesn't make you revolutionary, because I know a whole bunch of young Uncle Toms that you can find throughout St. Louis, right here. And the reason you saw a difference in these young people and the people who were trying to keep them from struggling was not because of age. It's because of ideology. And you had a situation where you had some sellouts. These are people who were put in place after they killed Malcolm, after they killed King, after they crushed the revolutionary movement. Then they rushed these old reactionary sellouts who were never for the revolution in the 1960s. So they ain't because they old. They were sellouts when they were 19. Right? They didn't just turn into sellouts, they always were sellouts. And I think that's the thing that needs to really be understood. Because somebody will push you out there, and you need the benefit. When I was a revolutionary in the 1960s, a critical thing that we were confronted with, that we had no veterans. There were no revolutionary veterans who could teach us anything, right? And I'm here to tell you that 50 years later, in me, you got a veteran. In Zaki, you got a veteran. And other people who are out there, we have, and you must take advantage of that experience. They didn't, even the Black Panther Party that a lot of people like to mention, it only had a revolutionary lifespan of about 3 years. The government hasn't allowed organizations to exist long enough, generally speaking, to achieve political maturity, ideological clarity, and whatever. Boom, it's dead overnight. And this is a different period. And that's why Zaki, one of the things that I found so striking about Zaki, this is a long answer, isn't it? Is that at a time where all these other Negroes were running around here decrying what the young people were doing, Zaki was saying, hey, I'm so proud of these young people, right? And he was there on the front lines all the time. So when I come to Ferguson, in fact, before I came to Ferguson, because nobody knew what the hell a Ferguson was, right? Thought it was, you know, you hear on the news, they said St. Louis. But then it says only 53 cops there. That can't be St. Louis, right? So looking for somebody, this is who I got pointed to. And then when I come here, if you're going to find Zaki Baruti in the middle of the struggle, you got to go to the front lines, because that's where he's going to be. And that's been one of the most powerful things. And that's part of what helped, whether you know it or not, sustain the movement here in St. Louis County, because you had old heads with a tradition. I heard a sister ask a question yesterday to a young brother here. Said, where were you on August 8th? And she said that because she was with Zaki on August 8th, and she was with Zaki the month before, and the year before, and the year before, where we're building a revolutionary movement. Now what is happening is you have this massive radicalization, abrupt radicalization of the masses of the people. Now it must be given direction and leadership. It must be given direction and leadership, and that's what this process is all about right now. So it wasn't just that when people went to sleep, the American government murdered a lot of people and threw a lot of people in prison in this country.
All right. And finally, the question was asked, do you believe that leaving Mike Brown's body laying in the street to be seen and photographed is what made the protest possible? Was it a good thing that people posted and reposted those images online, even though the family asked people not to post them?
It was extraordinarily important that that happened. It was extraordinarily important because it backfired. You know why they left Mike Brown's body there? It was a form of terrorism. It was a warning to every black person there that this will happen to you, nigga, if you go up against us, you will kill you. They leave the body. They used to decapitate black people and put their heads on stakes and what have you. They did. Right. So that all the other persons who tried to resist, this would be your example of what happens to you. And they did that with Mike Brown. And that was supposed to terrorize people and keep people from struggling, and it backfired on them. And it became the example of exactly why you have to struggle. So yeah, it's a good thing that they did it. And I want to say this, you know, we've heard all of these people come up and speak, you know, who've lost loved ones to murder. And that's bad enough, to lose somebody to murder. But to lose somebody to murder and then feel like there's nothing that you can do about it. I mean, they've murdered them, so what can I do? I got to pick up a gun and go kill the killer? Well, that's a reasonable and rational response. It's the most rational response in the world. Somebody has come and killed your people in your family and nobody would do anything, I'll take care of it, right? That's a rational response. But here you have these parents, these loved ones who have not reached the point. And I don't think they should have to reach the point as individuals, because they didn't know the names of the people who they killed before they killed them. They just knew it was one of us, right? So it's our problem, not their problem. But I want to say that as much as I can feel that heartbreak in there, it's really, again, not their problem. And as much as Mike Brown's family has been wounded by this, it's not just their problem. They didn't know Mike Brown's name. Darryl Wilson said, I didn't know who the hell he was. Just a nigga, just killed him, you understand? And so my point is that the struggle is just because somebody is a parent or a relative of somebody who was murdered by the police doesn't mean that they know a damn thing about struggle. It's just, they know something about heartbreak.
Right.
They know something about what happened to their family. All right. So just because you drive a car and something happens to your car engine doesn't make you a mechanic. And so you don't say, well, the family member said, let the car sit there. You call a mechanic to fix the car. And so mechanics are on the scene. And that's what's happening. This is how we have to respond to this problem. There's a social contradiction that has been imposed on us. We have to resolve it independent of whether or not people who were personally affected by it are willing to do it at any given moment. We got to do it, because if we don't do it, all the other Mike Browns out there are gonna die.
Right.
You know, and that becomes our responsibility.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to begin instructions for the Black People's Grand Jury. Brothers and sisters of the Black People's Grand Jury, I cannot overstate the importance of this process and how historic it is, like Zaki just alluded to. But I want to tell you, from the evidence presented today, you will decide what the facts are in this case. You decide that. I will repeat what I said in the beginning, in the opening statement that I made, that you're entitled to consider in the light of your own observations and experiences as Black people in the Black community. You may use your reason and common sense to draw deductions or conclusions from the facts which you have established in this evidence. Then you use that to actually apply those facts to the law. I will reiterate that this is not a trial. This is a grand jury proceeding. We did not hear all the evidence in this case. We know Robert McCullough had released over 5,000 pages worth of documents. We didn't do that here. We presented the evidence most important to this case to you. The people only required to present the facts that they believe is necessary to show probable cause. The trial jury's responsibility is to determine whether there's accused is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And then all the evidence is presented in that process. So your process is to just find probable cause. We do believe we have presented enough evidence to say there's probable cause to charge Darren Wilson with first-degree murder. We have viewed video testimony by Dorian Johnson stating that he was with Michael Brown August 9th when he was murdered by Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson. He's testified that Mike Brown had his hands up and was surrendering when he was shot and killed. We also heard video testimony from Tiffany Mitchell, Michael Brady, Bridget Crenshaw, as well as two unidentified white construction workers who stated essentially the corroborating testimony of Dorian Johnson, that Mike Brown was fleeing from Darren Wilson after being shot, turned around with his hands up, and was shot several times by Darren Wilson. We also heard video testimony from Dr. Sarah Witt, who's a forensic pathologist, that gave video testimony that not only did Michael Brown have his hands up, but the shot in the head suffered by Mike Brown was when he was falling. We even heard testimony from Robert McCullough himself, who said if he only allowed Dorian Johnson to testify, he would have charged Darren Wilson with first-degree murder. This means that he chose to subvert his responsibility and presented all the evidence just to confuse the jury. So you have the prosecutor telling you that he would have the grand jury would have charged first-degree murder if Dorian Johnson was on the stand. So we presented evidence of not just Dorian Johnson, but corroborating witnesses who essentially said the same thing that Dorian Johnson said. In the original grand jury proceeding overseen by Robert McCullough, the jury was given incorrect instructions about the use of deadly force. The controlling law actually has been struck down by a Supreme Court case that actually you have in your hands right now. The prosecutors only corrected this mistake after 3 months in this original proceeding. So we gave you this use of deadly force, the real law, the Supreme Court case right now. And again, you're only deciding whether there's probable cause that a crime occurred in this case. That's it. So probable cause is a very low standard in the law. Missouri courts define probable cause as knowledge of facts and circumstances sufficient for a prudent person to believe a suspect is committing or has committed an offense. In other words, a reasonable belief that a crime occurred. With that said, I'll read you the correct instructions for the use of deadly force by an officer. So it states a law enforcement officer pursuing an unarmed suspect may use deadly force to prevent escape only if the officer has probable cause to believe that suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officers or others. We have Mike Brown, who had already been shot by Officer Darren Wilson when he was inside the SUV. According to several witnesses, Mike Brown was fleeing from being shot. Darren Wilson exited the vehicle, pursued fleeing Mike Brown. Several other witnesses said that Mike Brown turned around with his hands up, and Darren Wilson shoots Mike Brown, striking him several times. One shot striking him in his head as he was falling. We submit that it's illogical for Darren Wilson to say that he was in any harm or serious bodily injury while this was taking place. Mike Brown had his hands up and was actually surrendering. So we submit that Darren Wilson has no grounds for the use of deadly force law. I will now read the instructions for first-degree murder, which you have in your packet. So first-degree murder penalty, a person under 16 years of age has not received a death penalty. So section 565.020 of the Missouri revised statute reads, a person commits the crime of murder in the first degree if he knowingly causes the death of another person after deliberation upon the matter. So deliberation is the huge point in this. So I'm going to read for you the case law on what deliberation is considered in the state of Missouri. So a person commits the crime of murder in the first degree if he knowingly causes the death of another person after deliberation upon the matter. Deliberation required for conviction for murder in the first degree is defined as a cool reflection for any length of time, no matter how brief. The deliberation necessary to support a conviction of first-degree murder need only be momentary. It is only necessary that the evidence show that the defendant considered taking another person's life in a deliberate state of mind. A deliberate act is a free act of the will done in furtherance of a form designed to gratify a feeling of revenge or to accomplish some other unlawful purpose, and you were not under influence of violent passion suddenly aroused by some provocation. Deliberation may be inferred from the circumstances surrounding the murder. So we will submit to you that Darren Wilson, Officer Darren Wilson, in that short period of time, from the time he was at the SUV, and he chose to flee, chose to pursue the fleeing Michael Brown, had time to deliberate, and when he saw Michael Brown with his hands up and surrendering, he chose to deliberate and shot him in cold blood. I also want to read the second-degree murder statute just to compare. A person commits the offense of murder in the second degree if he or she knowingly causes the death of another person or with the purpose of causing serious physical injury to another person, causing the death of another person. So to act knowingly means in a manner that produces a result. In this case, the result is death. So when you apply all these facts in the case, we submit that it's probable cause to indict Officer Wilson for first-degree murder. I would say at the end of the closing remarks, Zaki Baruti and also the chairman are going to make closing remarks and give you instructions. We're going to ask you to deliberate in the other room. We will need 9 members of the jury for an indictment, which is called a true bail. And if you don't reach the 9 number, then you will not find an indictment is warranted, and that's called no bail. Once your deliberation is concluded and you made the decisions, the foreperson will inform the bailiff, and the bailiff will inform one of the leading prosecutors that you made your decision. And reading the outcome of the grand jury proceedings, if you come back with a decision today, we'll read it today. If not, we'll come back later after the program, and it's going to be a press conference tomorrow, and it's going to be revealed to the public what the Black People's Grand Jury found. Please take your task with the utmost seriousness. You will now hear from the other prosecutors, and we believe, again, that there's probable cause to charge Darren Wilson with first-degree murder. Thank you.
Brothers, yeah, there's a question here from one of the grand jurors.
I, along with the rest of the grand jury, were wondering if the choices that we have to choose from for the indictments are we Are those choices exclusive to what we should make decisions based on, or can we make recommendations outside of those for, you know, additional counts that we believe may be applicable in this case?
Well, we as prosecutors in this grand jury process, they usually and essentially recommend charges for the specific person, that the suspect that's going to you know, be charged with the indictment. So we would say we're recommending that you see that there's first-degree murder, but you can also you know, go against that and charge Darren Wilson, anybody else you think is culpable of, you know, any crime that you see fit.
Generally what I understand is generally grand juries have a responsibility and a duty to also recommend to any state, you know, receiving public funds. So we would qualify for that type of decision under the law for grand jurors, but we were just wondering if in this particular instance, if that would be something that would be acceptable.
Well again,
yes, I got it. I don't want to, just making sure we're all on the same page.
Just tell me, for example,
for an example, if we were to believe that reckless homicide would be something that would be a, you know, a good fit and a good addendum and a good addition to this, would that be something that we would be able to choose from in addition to murder 1 or murder 2?
I think when the prosecution team actually looked at the facts, our job was to match the facts to the law, and not the other way around, if you get what I'm saying. How we saw it, the facts spoke to somebody who intentionally did a certain act, you know, something like what you're considering a reckless homicide. Yeah, that's the element of that would be getting into whether or not Darren Wilson intended to do something, you know, and we believe clearly from the facts speak to he had time to deliberate. There were many things that he could have done, but the facts speak to us that he took a certain road and that resulted in the death of Mike Brown. It didn't speak to a circumstance where he was doing something crazy. Recklessness suggests that, I don't know, he was doing something crazy and out of that craziness, Mike Brown ended up dead. No, you know, we got to apply the facts to the law, you know, so that's why in our minds as a prosecution team, it's murder. We believe that there's probable cause for first-degree murder, you know, and we don't even believe the second degree. But so that's why we put those options there, because other options don't speak to the facts. You see.
I understand what you're saying. So in essence, what you're saying is the recommendation that would be denied.
Okay. Yeah.
Brothers and sisters of the Black People's Grand Jury, I'd like to
get their attention.
First of all, I want to express my appreciation to you for taking this time out of your lives to come and participate in this procedure, and for taking this process as seriously as obviously those of us from the prosecutor's team take this case. So I want to commend you for that and express my deep and most profound appreciation for that. And I also have to extend my appreciation to the prosecutors, one of whom, Alex Morley, lawyer who traveled here from the Bahamas to participate in this process, and we're highly appreciative of that. There are some people who were clamoring, who thought that we needed a quote-unquote outside prosecutor, somebody who was not here, didn't know Darren Wilson, and didn't know Bob McCullough, anybody like that. And Alex Morley is that person, is one of those persons. And then, of course, we have with us Aaron O'Neill, who practices law in the Washington, D.C. area. And we have with us Zaki Baruti, who has earned his right to be here through a consistent struggle in the interest of our people. All of these folk who functioning as prosecutors can be recognized as somebody who struggles in the interest of our people. And I think that makes what they are offering us all the more significant. And in the situation with Alex Morley and Aaron O'Neill, obviously these are not ordinary lawyers who accept some kind of role and responsibility as officers of an oppressor state apparatus. They've come here to serve the people, and we are highly appreciative of that. I'm glad that one of the grand jurors, one of you, raised the question of other charges. And one reason I'm glad that occurred is because I heard another suggestion earlier on that perhaps the grand jury should rule in a way that there's a greater likelihood that the state would appreciate it and might do something for us. And I want to suggest to you that this grand jury should go and deliberate, but you should not be intimidated by any assumption that this grand jury is impotent. You cannot go and deliberate with the assumption that, as opposed to applying the law to the facts, let's come up with something that somebody is going to appreciate and be more likely to say it was all right for us to do this. We cannot see our responsibility here with this grand jury as coming up with a solution that pleases someone. Our responsibility is to do what we saw a grand jury under the authority of St. Louis County and Robert McCullough. Under their authority, they refused to apply the law to the facts. To the facts. And what we are saying is that we are here today in part as a criticism of that process. Therefore, we cannot do less than that. We cannot do less than applying the law to the facts. The facts, we believe, we've shown here, not only through direct evidence coming from from forensics pathologists, not only from testimony that we saw with video from Doran Johnson and other witnesses who saw what happened. Not only that, but what we did was show that there is a tendency, a trend, a tradition here in this county for doing what happened to Mike Brown. That Darren Wilson was not acting as an outlaw. He was not acting as a rogue cop. He was doing what police do to black people in this county. We show that evidence right here. We've had people who sat at that witness stand, at this witness stand, and say they shot my son 21 times, and they still haven't told me anything that allows me to understand why they did it. We've had witnesses who've talked about other relatives being killed and brutalized in this county. So we're not talking about some aberration. We're saying that Darren Wilson did it. We're saying that not only did he do it, but a cover-up was enacted. First, by the grand jury process itself, by the fact that it even went to a grand jury, as opposed to Robert McCullough using the power to take it to a preliminary hearing. So that there could have been a debate, an examination of the evidence, cross-examination, the rest of it. He didn't do that. He took it instead to a grand jury. which is a prosecutor's tool. It is a tool of the prosecution that has led to statements by noted attorneys that a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. So if a prosecutor wants an indictment, he will get an indictment. We're also reminded that a grand jury is not a trial. It is not there for the purpose of examining all the evidence. It is for the purpose of establishing probable cause for an indictment. We didn't throw 5,000 pages of anything at you. I think that a real clear case was presented to you over the last day and a half that would justify your coming back after deliberation with the declaration that Darren Wilson is guilty of first-degree murder. I also think that it is possible for you to consider the role played in this process by Bob McCullough. The arrogance, hypocrisy, the lying, all of which have happened in the face of what is assumed to be a black community without power to deliver consequences. Nobody does this to a community that they assume can deliver a consequence. It's based on the assumption that they can do it, and there's nothing that you can do about it. This grand jury says that is a lie, that there is something that we can do about it. You have to, in my estimation, come back with the determination that Darren Wilson is guilty, or should be rather, indicted for first-degree murder. Also, the question is, well, should we do it? I mean, if Robert McCullough had determined that Darren Wilson should have been indicted, they had the guns, they had the authority, they had the ability to go and arrest him and throw him in jail, and they could do those things. And we look at ourselves, we don't have the guns. And from their perspective, when I say there, I'm talking about St. Louis County. I'm talking about the state. And I don't just mean the state of Missouri, I mean the state, the entire apparatus of coercion that is in control of the ruling class. They have all of those tools and weapons. So why should you do it? Why should you then say he should be indicted? Because we have shown you, on the one hand, the same basic evidence that was used by Robert McCullough to those 12 people in November. The same evidence, and they've come to a conclusion that exonerated, rewarded Darren Wilson for the murder of an 18-year-old black child. They've done that. You have an opportunity to do something different. If, in fact, they have the power to carry out their will, when I say they in this instance, I'm talking about St. Louis County. I'm talking about the whole state. I'm talking about those forces with the monopoly on violence. They have a monopoly on violence. That's what the state is. If they have the power to carry out their will, and they can make determinations that are designed to keep you oppressed, can anybody doubt the determination that came from St. Louis County Grand Jury was designed to keep us oppressed, to keep the Michael Browns of our community dying without any kind of recourse? If they have the ability to do that, and we say that we have to move to correct that, and we use a grand jury to do this, this is a step in the process of capturing power in our own hands to carry out the mission. You can't carry out the mission if you don't start. You can't move to do anything to Darren Wilson and the rest of them if you don't start. You've got to start somewhere, and you've got to say, we're taking control of this in our own hands as an oppressed community, that we do find that Darren Wilson should be indicted for first-degree murder of Michael Brown on August 9th. That is the beginning. That is the recommendation that's coming from these prosecutors. Thank you very much.
What can I say after the lead prosecutor has really gave you the charge? What I would like to say, though, on the real side, in terms of the historic moment that we're at, on behalf of the Universal African Peoples Organization, we want to salute the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement and the African People's Socialist Party for the foresight, for the vision that we as a people need to adopt, not just here in Ferguson, but in New York, in regards to Eric Gardner, not only in New York, but in Cleveland. All across this country, we as a people need to become self-determining. And this is the step in this process. So let's, for a moment, give the visionaries, starting with Brother Omali Yesateli, the kind of applause for what that standing applause for that vision as we take this process across the globe. Also, I want to salute those who have chosen, as Brother Omali Yesateli had brought out earlier, to spend this time to go over the evidence, and not only over the evidence, but to kind of get a clear understanding of, quote unquote, the grand jury process. Because how many of us are really tuned in to their so-called process? As well as the audience, because this sets the model. No grand, in actuality, if you don't have a grand jury, then open it up for the people. If you have a grand jury, let me reemphasize, and it has some racial connotations to it, such as a white officer and a black unarmed civilian, let the grand jury be half and half. 6 blacks, 6 whites, if we don't have that process. My only closing statement takes me back to the incident with Rodney King, where they said to the masses of the people, don't believe your lying eyes. We have clear evidence from the community through their lenses of what they saw. The only opposing viewpoint from Darren Wilson and a person who they say was a proven liar to contradict what all was presented as collaborating evidence as to Michael Brown with his hands up being shot and murdered by Darren Wilson. Mind you, we also have to understand the concept that the police are not the judge, jury, and executioner. So you have a duty, a historic duty, that this message will again reverberate not only in this area, but across this country. And the right way to do it is come back with justice, and that justice is that Darren Wilson needs to be indicted for his first-degree murder. Thank you.
Do members of the grand jury have any questions? Any issues? Okay. We're going to ask members of the grand jury to please stand. And the bailiff, the Black People's Grand Jury is adjourned, and juries are now dismissed to begin deliberations, and the bailiff can now escort you out.
Uhuru means freedom. My name is Constance Jimenez, and I'm here with my daughter, Layla Alexander. I'm a member of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement in St. Petersburg, Florida. As we attend the Black People's Grand Jury, we must not forget that after these proceedings are over, the struggle against reparations, miseducation of our children, and police violence will still continue. Therefore, I want to encourage everyone who is attending the Black People's Grand Jury and those of you who are watching around the world to join the fight. Join our campaign for Black community control of the police. We must be able to hire, fire, and discipline the police within the Black community. If you want to fight for real empowerment in the African community, join NPDOM. Our standard membership is only $35 a year. Just go to npdom.org or join at the Black People's Grand Jury event. Please don't forget to donate to the Black People's Grand Jury online at the link below.
We have another question from the audience. The question says, what would be required to bring pressure that would result in a new special prosecutor being appointed to bring charges against Darren Wilson in the shooting death of Mike Brown? What would be required to bring pressure? I believe that what we're doing right now, that this is the beginning. Organization and taking power in our own hands. I believe that this is the beginning. Yesterday, Prosecutor Aaron O'Neill also said that at any moment, a grand jury can be reconvened in this matter. And I think that what we're doing can apply that pressure. And yeah, that's what I would say. I don't know if any other prosecutors want to say something.
I think that's an important issue, and I wanted to also unite with the sentiments that were expressed by the last brother who was up at the microphone. I think it's essentially what's been said throughout this process. I think he's just said it in his own way. In the first place, let me reiterate what I felt was a really important point, and that is that African people are colonized, subject population. I'm always concerned when I hear us talking about fighting against racism, that our struggle is against racism. Because racism is simply the ideas in the heads of white people that allows them to unite with maintaining our colonial oppression, to facilitate colonialism. How do you talk about a movement to make white people like you? I mean, you know, how do you know when you won the struggle against racism? Does somebody come out and wave a white flag and say, I surrender? Every other people in the world have understood colonialism, which is the domination of a people by another foreign and hostile alien group. That's colonialism every place in the world. We recognize it when we see it in occupied Palestine, where people who used to be Europeans went to Palestine and stole the land and killed many of the people there and changed their names from Americans and Russians and Germans and called themselves Israelis and changed the name of the land from Palestine to Israel and act like they'd always been there. In fact, they went further than that. They said God gave them to them 2,000 years ago, that God's a real estate dealer. And colonialism looks the same. When I've been driving through Ferguson at different times of the day, and I see the barricades and roadblocks up, etc., just like in Israel, just like in occupied Palestine. When I hear that the police killed him because they thought it was a toy gun. A play gun by a 12-year-old child on a playground. On a playground, right? And then I read in the newspaper that the last missile, drone missile that Obama sent to Afghanistan just accidentally killed everybody in a wedding party or everybody in the funeral. Those mistakes get made by a colonial power when they're dealing with another colonized people. If you are colonized, the way you resolve that is by overthrowing your colonial masters, not by making the colonizer like you. If you are stuck in the problem with this process, where what you see your task is fighting against racism or making your enemies like you, that means that they can shoot you and kill you, and you can't even throw a brick at them, because if you throw a brick at them, they won't like you. So you're stuck in this horrible place of being concerned that you are going to offend the ones who are oppressing you, which is why we always find ourselves on the back foot, trying to explain, well, he had a good education, even if he never saw a school, which is a colonial school in the first place. He shouldn't have died like that. You see. And I think what we really have to come to terms with is that we are oppressed and colonized people. We just are participating in a grand jury proceeding. And from our perspective, this is a part of the process of claiming self-determination, claiming the right to control our own lives. It is a part of the process. It's not the whole thing, but I would tell you this, and I would be on record for saying this, that any people, anywhere on earth that would now allow another people, first of all, whose reputation, whose basis of a relationship with that people, our relationship with America is one that was imposed on us at gunpoint. We are the only people in this country, other than the indigenous population, that did not come here looking for a better way of life, but lost a better way of life as a consequence of being brought here. We ain't come here looking for a better way. Somebody attacked us and brought us here against our will. That's the beginning of the process. You must understand and recognize the history of a process if you're going to understand where you are today. You can't understand today without understanding the history of what brought you here. I tell you this, that Michael Brown, the process that killed Mike Brown on August 9, 2014, began 600 years ago when Portugal first attacked Africa and kidnapped black people in 1415. That's when the process began. And here we are having to treat every incident, every new thing, like it's a separate problem. We've been fighting since we got here. Nothing, it's not like we once upon a time, black people kidnapped and brought here, became free, and then somehow had slavery imposed on us again. It's never ended. The same system that enslaved us exists today. Ain't no different system, it's the same system. So even if they ended what they call slavery, the system that created slavery still exists. The system that grew out of slavery still exists. It didn't go anywhere. So why do you think we will be treated any differently today? You don't have no more power than you did when you got here. That is just an objective reality. It's not one that we necessarily like to happen. Somewhere not too far from here, there was a determination made around the so-called Dred Scott decision. I thought that's some of the most honest, good law that I've ever read about the relationship of black people in this country. Because Taney, Judge Taney from the Supreme Court wrote and stated that black people were not brought here to be citizens. He said we were brought here as chattel slavery. There's nothing in the record, in history, that assumes that we got any rights at all. And then he said that black people have no rights that white people have to respect. That was what Taney said. And the only time that seems to have changed that was the Civil War. But if you look at the reality, Darren Wilson killed Mike Brown on August 9th. Witnesses saw it. People testified about that. Grand jury heard the evidence, heard some of the same testimony that we heard here, and then let Darren Wilson walk. Didn't just let him walk, they retired him with a golden parachute. If that's not the Dred Scott decision all over again, you tell me what is. Choke Eric Garner to death. And I have to mention this because they say what we need here is body cameras. Choke this brother to death. Video camera goes, all pictures of it go all around the world. Grand jury said it didn't happen that way. If that's not Dred Scott all over again, you tell me what the hell is. A 12-year-old child in a playground with a play gun. This is not a child on a police range or a police station. This is not a child in the bank. It's a child with a play gun in a playground. A cop shows up in 2 seconds. You heard what I said? Wasn't 2 minutes. The article in our newspaper, the Burning Spear, was wrong. It said 2 minutes. It was 2 seconds. Within 2 seconds of the arrival of the cop, they shot and killed that baby. I'm tired of it. And I don't give a damn what the law says. Because a law that would validate and justifies that is no law at all. It is a law made by outlaws. It is a law made by outlaws. And I will remind you that slavery was legal. And everybody who's got this hang up about the law would have found themselves justifying slavery and did find themselves justifying slavery. And one of the most magnificent heroes that we've ever known, his name was Nat Turner. One of the few black preachers that I have respect for, who organized in the communities, and he trained us and he told us, strike at night and spare no one. Is there something wrong with killing slave masters? But it's against the law. Is there something wrong with ending slavery? It was against the law to try to do it. John Brown, a white man, tried to end it, broke the law. They put his white butt on trial, brought him in a courtroom, called him crazy. So, law, what is law? Law is the opinion of the ruling class. Law is the instrument that's used by the state to justify its oppressive relationship with the people. What you got to do, and the state legalizes itself. That's the thing about the state. People shouldn't worry sitting here on the black people's grand jury about whether it's legal or not. We're struggling to move one oppressive state out of our lives and to acquire black state power over our lives. The state legalizes itself, which is why slavery was legal, which is why the Constitution said that black people constitute 3/5 of a human being. The state legalizes itself. And when you overturn this relationship, part part of what you're in the process of doing is building your own state power. Then you put the police in jail. That's why after every revolution, new set of trials begin. When this thing is over, we ain't gonna need so many prisons. We have far fewer prisons than what we have today. 1 out of every 8 human beings on earth that's in a prison in the world is a black person in this country. Don't tell me a damn thing about the law. 1 out of every 8 human beings on earth in prison is a black person in this country. The largest prison population in the world. 2.3 million people locked up in prison. If you freed the Africans, the Mexicans, and the Indians from prison in this country, you reduced the prison population by 2/3. Is it a coincidence that the ones who are filling up the prisons are the ones who were enslaved, the ones whose land was stolen from them and stuffed in the concentration camps called reservations? The ones Mexicans whose land, half of Mexico, stolen from them? The law was consolidated in the process of enslaving us, killing Indians, and stealing Mexico. And I'm supposed to respect it? So I'm saying that we'll work with their law. That's what we've just done. And what we working with their law, it's really clear to us that I understand that when Europeans first met the people they call Indians, they had a confused navigator when they got here. That the indigenous people didn't even have a word for lie. That was not even in their language, lying. Isn't that incredible? They didn't know what they was up against. Which is why we hear terms like, that white man speaks with 2 tongues. 2 tongues. Because lie was a foreign concept. They had a different kind of society, an egalitarian society, where there were no exploited and no exploiters, where there were no oppressed and no oppressors. And if everybody owns everything in common, you don't have to tell a lie. If there's no such thing as this horrible thing that's been imposed on us called private property, and don't flinch because I know you think you own your house, but the bank, check your mortgage. But the reality is that this thing that they call private property has been something that they've used against the peoples of the world. When you look around the world, you look at what they call South America, and you see all those borders there. Those borders weren't there when white folks got there. Did you know that? The borders that you see now, people of white making war all over what they call the Middle East. France, the United States, England, rather, they made those borders. Those borders didn't exist there. And you look at the continent of Africa, my Africa. Somebody said I'm not an African, I'm an American. I am an African. You can't get on no ship in Africa in 1419 as an African and then get off in Jamestown, Virginia as a Negro. If we were Africans when we got on the damn ship, we were Africans when we got off the ship. That's just the way it is. Unless that was a special ship. Maybe the one that Noah fell off and was swallowed by the great fish. Maybe one of them beam me up Scotty ships. But if it was a regular ship, when we got on the ship in Africa as Africans and then got off in this country, we had to still be Africans. Doesn't matter whether or not you've ever been there or not. I will tell you this. I went to Africa for the first time in my life in my 60s. And the thing that blew me away was for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a stranger. But you know what? You know what? I didn't even know I felt like a stranger until I went to Africa. I didn't even know I felt like a stranger while I was here. That's right. First time in my life, I didn't feel like a stranger. Africa, Mother Africa, my dear, dear, dear Africa, my beloved Africa, my Africa that suffered so much, my Africa that's had Ebola and all kinds of disease spread over trying to destroy the people there so that you can continue to steal the land and resources there. My Africa. My Africa. Africa is the birthright of every living human black person on the earth, whether we recognize it or not. Here we are, many times running from Africa, and you got to shoot white people to make them leave Africa. Because of all the wealth and resources that are there. And don't worry about it because you ain't never been to Africa, you don't know nothing about Africa. Hell, half the people in Africa don't know nothing about Africa. That's been my experience. You probably know more about Africa than people who live in a particular village there. Just like in this city, most people in Africa don't even leave the village, the community that they live in. We just live right there, in that community, in that village. So you can go to Africa with so much information about Africa, you know, to share. But anyway, I almost said that's another story, but it's not another story. It's the same old story, that black people are a nation that has been forcibly dispersed all over this world. When they kidnapped us, they called it slavery. What they had done to us is take away our right to be a self-determining people. Self-determination, a people acting in its own interest, self-acting in its own interest. After a period of time, they ended what they called slavery, or it was ended. And then they said that we're citizens. You know that, right? What amendment was it that said that we were citizens? Somebody know? Of the Constitution. Let's leave it alone. It doesn't matter. That's worth as much as useless as used toilet paper. But I want to tell you about the 13th Amendment. You familiar with the 13th Amendment? The 13th Amendment, they say, formally ended slavery. Isn't that what they said? But listen what it really said. Read it sometime. Because it said neither slavery nor indentured servitude shall be legal except as punishment for a crime. They didn't end slavery. They just redefined what slavery is, which is why in America today, largest prison population on earth, 2.3 million people, half the people at least in prison are Africans. Slavery still exists. We do not have the right to self-determination, to determine our own fate, to know that our children will have a future not because some good white man may or may not get elected, not because some good white woman may or may not get elected, not because some Negro who used to be black may or may not get elected, but because we black people ourselves can say that our children will have a future. Can't live any other way. That's why you got high blood pressure. That's why you got all these other problems that the brother was talking about, the psychological issues and problems that you're confronted with. You also got problems because people can murder you in your community, murder your children, and you won't do anything about it because the law says you can't do it. You know that makes you sick to your stomach. How many of you were sickened by listening to what these folks said? Listen to Brother Washington, just on his porch, Vietnam veteran, proud of it. And then the police come and sick the dogs on him. How long have they been sicking dogs on us? Can't tolerate that. Can't live with that. Won't live with that. So this grand jury is just a step in the direction to make sure it doesn't happen. Robert McCullough must go. I believe that part of this grand jury, our responsibility as a people, the grand jury will help us depending on the verdict that it comes back with. if you can't carry out your verdict because you don't have the guns and organization to carry it out, it simply tells you what you got to do. That's all it says. See, I can't do that because they got all the guns. Except, no, they ain't got them all. They ain't got them all. Everybody who's ever fought in the press or started out with no guns. The Vietnamese started out with bricks and sticks. The French had all the guns. Before it was over, the Vietnamese were shooting French guns at French soldiers. You understand? The point is that you cannot tolerate oppression and slavery because the notion of fighting for your freedom is something that is unpleasant to you. You cannot start off saying that there are certain conditions beyond which I will not go in order to be free. You can't say that. If you do, then you'll always be a slave. So we have to have our own power. But Robert McCullough, in the interim, Robert McCullough can go. And I believe that we have to initiate that movement. Brother Zaki tried to get him out of there before. But he has now created the circumstances for us. I believe we can get him disbarred. I believe we can make something happen based on his own statements, this violation of ethics, where he said, I put somebody there who I knew was a liar. I think we need to start a movement to bust his ass up. That's right. Bring him down, bring him down, bring him down. I think that's something within our capacity to bring him down. Even as we are going for a black community, for controlling our own communities and our own power. I think that we have to fight for and use this process to build for black community control of the police. I don't mean this in some kind of symbolic way. I mean that black people have the responsibility to control everybody with a gun in our community. That if somebody's going to be walking around in our community sanctioned by law to carry a gun and with the ability to kill, then they should be controlled by the people in this community. The community should control them. Ain't no mystery to how to solve the problem. Cameras, sensitivity training, cultural awareness. Hell, I'm already aware culturally. And I'm not going to shoot a 12-year-old black child in a playground with a play gun. Black community control of the school, of the police, which means we hire them, we fire them, we train them, and we change their mission. Because as it is now, the police is an invading force that comes into our community looking for trouble that they call crime. That's why it comes to the community, looking for trouble. It doesn't live in the community. They got no stakes in the community. It's not their children, their cousins, their friends, their relatives in the community. They are foreigners. They come there looking for trouble that they define as crime. So if somebody's walking down the street, crime, right? Somebody's walk out of the sandwich shop eating a sandwich, crime, right? We changed their mission. You live in the community. Take off those stormtrooper uniforms that you're wearing. Ski masks, take them off. You share the problems that this community is confronted with. You say there's so much crime in our community. There's so much joblessness in this community. There's so much bad health in this community. There's so much bad education in this community. So if you serve the people, then you serve in every capacity, not just somebody coming looking for trouble. So the role of the police then changes from that of somebody coming looking for trouble, but somebody that's a part of the community that's solving all the problems of the community. And you got to live here. Because somebody might need to come and knock on your door 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and say there's a problem down the street. And then the other thing that I think we have to look at, and we can consider these questions, is reparations. Because our community is starving. And we don't work too hard to be a starving community. Every time we live someplace, we live there for a while, the white people become uncomfortable with our presence, then they move out. That's why you got 92 municipalities here in St. Louis County. They move out someplace else. But once they get there, they say they've discovered they still need Negroes to come work for them. So we end up moving where they are. If enough of us move there, then they move out again, so that we are the majority and goes over and over and over again. We need reparations. We work too hard. And there can be a viable movement for reparations to be paid to our people in our community. These are some things I think we should consider in addition to whatever it is that the grand jury has brought back to us. I thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it back over to the prosecutors. Uhuru.
Brothers and sisters of the jury, black grand jury, have you reached a verdict? Yeah. Okay. Could the foreperson please stand and read?
We, the Black People's Grand Jury, based on the evidence presented under careful consideration, have decided that there is probable cause to indict Officer Darren Wilson on the charge of first-degree murder and submit this true bill.
Thank you for your service. I'd like to thank the Black People's Grand Jury for their deliberation, their careful deliberation. You can stand and you can be dismissed. We thank you for your service.
Good morning. It's good to see everybody here this Monday morning, and we're here today as NPDEM, the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, to announce the decision of the Black People's Grand Jury. I would like to introduce our chairman, Omali Yeshitela of the African People's Socialist Party, to deliver the decision.
Thank you very much. I want to express appreciation to those of you of the media who did come out. And I want to acknowledge here with me Zaki Baruti, who is the leader of the Universal African Peoples Organization, and an organization that really functioned very much as a partner with the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement that presided over this Black People's Grand Jury. We had nearly two days of testimony here and evidence presented for the Black People's Grand Jury. We had a grand jury comprised of 12 people local to St. Louis County. We had 4 prosecutors, one of whom practices law in the United Kingdom and in Bahamas, another licensed to practice law in Washington, D.C., that area. And in addition to those persons who, Alex Morley and Aaron O'Neill, respectively, Zaki Baruti and I, Omali Yeshitela, chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, also functioned as prosecutors. We were not able to secure the actual presence of Darren Wilson, who was served the subpoena, asked to be here, especially since he seemed to be so eager to testify before a grand jury. We were not able to get the presence either of Robert McCullough, who presided over the St. Louis County grand jury process, something that we thought to be extremely important because we saw the Black People's Grand Jury not only as something that would look at the evidence relating to the actions of Darren Wilson on August 9th, 2014. But the Black People's Grand Jury we saw actually as a criticism of the grand jury that had occurred under the auspices of St. Louis County and Robert McCullough. So we felt like it was going to be extremely important for him to be here. In the absence of both Robert McCullough and Darren Wilson, we were able to show to the grand jury and to the audience that was here and live streamed throughout the world in a very transparent process, video testimony. We were able to present audio evidence from Robert McCullough talking about how he did knowingly allow persons that he knew to be lying testify on behalf of Darren Wilson, someone who he knew had actually participated as a fundraiser for Darren Wilson, in serious violation of ethical violations of his profession. So it was important we thought, to have the grand jury listen to that testimony, which suggested that the entire process was tainted from its inception. We also thought it was important for Robert McCullough to be present so that he could explain to the grand jury why there was a grand jury in the first place when he had it within his own capacity legally to use a preliminary hearing that would have allowed serious cross-examination of Darren Wilson and all witnesses and an examination of all evidence that was presented, and to do so in a transparent and open fashion. We thought that it was extraordinarily suggestive that Robert McCullough would instead use this private process and behind closed doors, and then would inundate the people who were supposed to be a part of a grand jury with more than 5,000 pages of testimony in a process which by law is only for the purpose of presenting the evidence necessary by law for an indictment. Of course, that's to show probable cause for an indictment. Robert McCullough chose not to do that. We had also with us the transcripts from the process that occurred under the leadership of Robert McCullough that showed clearly that the prosecutor's function in that grand jury, more than anything else, was to provide an explanation that would exonerate Darren Wilson for the execution on August 9th of 18-year-old Mike Brown. We also presented video testimony from Doran Johnson, who was someone with Mike Brown when he was killed by Darren Wilson on August 9th. We were not able to assess Doran Johnson in person. And after looking at the transcripts of how he was treated at the grand jury under the leadership of Robert McCullough, it is clear to us why it would be difficult and why he would be hesitant to step before a grand jury when it is extraordinary that the transcripts show that Doran Johnson, who was a witness to a murder, was treated as a criminal, and the person who actually executed Mike Brown was treated with kid gloves before that grand jury. We had testimony also, video testimony, from Cyril West, who is a forensic pathologist, who offered an explanation that challenged everything that Darren Wilson, Bob McCullough, and many people, especially in national media, suggested was a reasonable explanation for why Mike Brown, 6'4", was shot in the top of his head. The notion, of course, that after having been wounded by Darren Wilson and concerned enough to run away, would turn around unarmed and then would chase or would attempt to tackle an armed Darren Wilson that had already demonstrated his willingness to shoot him. And so we presented that testimony. We presented video testimony from other forces, a woman who sat in her car and watched him executed and who participated before the grand jury of Bob McCullough, a man who watched from his window and saw the execution, all of them corroborating the testimony by Doran Johnson about how Mike Brown was killed. This is some of the evidence that we presented before the grand jury. But in addition to that, we felt it was absolutely necessary to show that there is a pattern of behavior by police in this county toward African people, to show that there is an historical relationship that does exist in this county toward African people. We had testimony from the parents of Vonderette Myers, who talked about how their child was killed. We had testimony from the parents of Carrie Ball, another victim of police murder in this county, who talked about what happened with them. We had a man to come forward and testify about how in the middle of a domestic dispute, the police would arrive and rather than treat him civilly and even question him, would have dogs put on him, injure him while they watched the dogs do that. This man happened to have been a Vietnam veteran who had served this country and who thought that he understood how to work with the police in a very respectable way. This is some of the testimony that we had. It was a very serious and historic process, I must say. And it was very clear that the grand jurors took their responsibility seriously as well. We could tell that by some of the questions that were asked by the grand jury before they went to begin their deliberations. And that included the question of whether or not there could be other charges. Interestingly, on at least one occasion, whether a lesser charge would be something that would be permissible. We called on the grand jury to understand that the charges that were put forward, the possible charges were first and second degree murder. And that the reason for this is that they had a responsibility and we had a responsibility in this instance to apply law to the facts of the case. And we were convinced that the facts of the case clearly demonstrated that Darren Wilson had an opportunity to choose differently, but instead chose to execute 18-year-old Mike Brown and did so. This was the charge that we gave to the grand jury. There was, the grand jury then retired to deliberate and to do so out of the presence of the prosecutors. So it was their own deliberation that took place. And they came back within an hour to bring forth their verdict. And it was the verdict of this grand jury, this historic Black People's grand jury, that was here to make a statement to the world that we are not helpless in the face of decisions made by people that would victimize us, that would make mothers responsible for burying their children as teenagers. We were not helpless. And so this grand jury, taking its charge very seriously, came back with the determination that Darren Wilson must be indicted for first-degree murder. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Sir, could you spell your name for us, please?
My first name is spelled O-M-A-L-I, O'Malley. My last name is Y-E-S-H-I-T-E-L-A. Ishitella.
Thank you.
I think one of the grand jurors is with us as well. In the event there is any need to discuss the deliberation, something I have not done. And I don't know if Zaki Baruti wanted to make any statement.
Well, the only statement that I can make is, first of all, salute Brother Omale Yesitele as the lead prosecutor with the importance of this Black People's Grand Jury being very historic, being a statement that we as a people must become self-determinant, and we cannot allow those outside of our community to determine what we deem as necessary steps for justice. So it's in that spirit that our organization proudly stood with this process. As he mentioned, it was very transparent. It was very transparent in terms of the grand jury. Members were able to ask a number of questions of the people who gave testimony, as well as we opened it up for the public. So it set a precedent. It set a precedent in terms of, if there is to be justice here in this country, then there needs to be a total different approach to incidents, especially racial incidents, in which the accused many times are white police officers who so many times in this country are set free and through legal loopholes. It sets a precedent that if there are to be grand juries outside of our community, minimally, grand juries are to be of equal numbers of Black and whites participating, if there are to be a need for a grand jury. But as my brother pointed out, Bob McCullough didn't even need that process. He just set the stage to project the mockery of what happened several months, with his decision that Darren Wilson was not to be indicted.
Well, so you were the lead prosecutor. Can I ask you, what's the message that you want sent? Obviously, this decision holds no legal bearing here, but what's the message to come out of this? Why is this significant in your mind?
Well, the first thing I want to say is this. Slavery was legal. The question for us is not whether an oppressor's law is legal or not. The question of whether it is oppressive. The message, more than anything, was to Black people, African people in this country, who are victimized by police terror and murder throughout this country. If it were simply a case of one individual having been killed on August 9th, the community in Ferguson would not have rebelled the way it did. It could have been passed off as an accident. It could have been passed off as a possible just shooting, but that wasn't the case. And we also saw that immediately after that, Von Derek Myers over on Shaw was gunned down, shot 8 times, 7 of which were in the back. We saw in July, before that, the public execution of Eric Garner, choked to death. And I'm not even sure the choking was the worst part of the crime. Anybody who saw what happened, the inhumane way that he was treated, with his head by police being pushed through the pavement. There's something that's happening in this country and has been happening for a long time. For the duration of our presence in this country as Black people, we've been struggling to try and end the oppression of our people, starting with trying to rid ourselves of a process of having been kidnapped and forced labor that built the economy of this country. It's this forced labor, this economy, upon which the legal foundation of America rests. So when we say it has no legal bearings, actually Nat Turner, who led a rebellion to kill slave masters and overturn slavery, was brought to court, was tried, convicted, called guilty. He made the statement then, I don't feel guilty. I don't think he was guilty either. He was guilty of a crime because slavery was legal. So to say that this has no legal bearing, I think is to misunderstand what this is about.
Yeah, let me rephrase it. What's significant about it then?
What's significant about it, as Brother Zaki Baruti just mentioned, it is a step in the direction of self-determination. It is something that's being done in the face of demonstrations, protests happening around this country around police violence. Many times, this is protest that doesn't seem to have direction. Many times it doesn't seem to be aimed toward any end. What this process we've engaged in says is there must be an end, and that end is self-determination. That black people must take control of our lives. We cannot trust our children, the future of our community, in the hands of this establishment that has proved to us over and over again its disregard for black life. So it is a step towards self-determination. To have two courts have occurred, two hearings, two grand juries. We heard more or less the same evidence. We applied here, however, the law. Grand juries are not trials. Bob McCullough's inundation of the people with 5,000 pages of testimony violated every principle of what a grand jury is about that's ever applied any place in this country. Grand juries are for the purpose simply of getting the evidence and information that would inform a determination of whether an indictment should happen, and that is simply probable cause that a crime has been committed. Bob McCullough himself, and I heard him say it, and that testimony was provided for the grand jury, that the testimony of Doran Johnson alone was enough for an indictment. He chose not to do that. Instead, he chose to bring witness number 40, who he said he knew was lying, who testified over 2 days in defense of Darren Wilson, I guess taking a break from her fundraising efforts that rewarded Darren Wilson for the execution of Mike Brown. This was a black people's grand jury. That was an extraordinarily serious event. We heard nothing from anybody. Anybody in the world who wanted to see what happened and whether it was a just proceeding had an opportunity to do that. They could walk through these doors and have a seat in the auditorium. They could watch it online from any place in the world, which is not something that Bob McCullough and St. Louis County can say about what they did with the case of Darren Wilson and Mike Brown.
That's right.
What is your reaction to the lawsuit that was filed against Bob McCullough by one of the grand jurors?
Well, can you say more about the lawsuit that was filed?
Not familiar with that.
No.
You're not familiar?
No.
He was saying, the story came out today that the grand juror is saying that he mischaracterized the case. Yep.
Well, that's what we said. He mischaracterized the case. We are happy that the grand jury appears to be catching up, right? And I don't know what is meant by he mischaracterized the case, when, or anything like that. I think what really I want to say, and what the point that we're trying to make, we hope that everybody comes to the correct conclusions about what happened here. Again, this is a very transparent process that we're involved in. And we do believe that the announcement that this grand jury was going to occur set the stage for people to discover witness number 40. Set the stage for a grand juror in retrospect to determine that he did the wrong thing. And if nothing else, it seems to me, that alone says something about the significance of this process here. Given an opportunity to do what they want to do without any kind of confrontation by the people with truth, then the lie will prevail forever. The reason we are having this discussion now is because black people step forward and say we will take our future in our own hands. We will listen to this testimony. We will bring witnesses forward, and then we will come to a conclusion that is just and transparent. That's why we can hear about witness 40, and we can hear other things about grand jurors having discovered that Mr. McCullough misstated the case.
And if I may also add, out of this grand jury, it's ironic that you would see, in terms of so-called witnesses for Darren Wilson, being only juror 40. Whereas all the other witnesses were from the community, yet he is found not guilty or no probable cause for an indictment. That speaks to the mockery of the grand jury in the first place. And also that speaks to the deep racial divide, not only here in St. Louis, but throughout the country. When you have a jury that was composed of 12, 9 being white and 3 being black, and we don't know how they voted along those lines inside of the jury anyway. So again, that speaks to the deeper issues that is not only evident with the murder of Mike Brown, but as he just mentioned, Eric Gardner, Tamar Rice, and so on, that has occurred day after day, year after year in our communities, when you find police officers who act as if they are members of the KKK, which of course was sanctioned lynchings, but we say today is legal lynching that occurs with the killing of black people, and that must stop. And this is the great process by which we feel will be a way to move forward into the future.
I would like to make just one other statement, because I can't say how anybody else understands this process of the grand jury. I think we're so accustomed in this country to rigged processes that there may be an assumption that something was rigged about this. But I can tell you that the prosecutors waited with bated breath to coin a phrase to see what the determination of this grand jury would be. And as I understand it, of the 12, that there were 11 for the first degree murder conviction, rather indictment, and one that had another position on that. So it wasn't some slam dunk thing, and it wasn't some blind group of people, but it was a group of people who took their responsibilities very seriously and who had before them every inch of the way the law as it is written, as it is characterized for this county and this country. So this was a prevailing thing that occurred throughout this process. And I wanted to make that statement, and I think one of the grand jurors is here. I don't know if you want to say anything about your deliberations or anything like that. Yeah. Yeah. Were you the lead?
I was the foreman.
Foreman, yeah, go ahead. Say your name. So.
My name is Robert Dillard, and I was the foreman in juror number 1. And it was a difficult process, because for us, for all of us, none of us wanted to be part of the problem. None of us wanted to be, part of a system that we were protesting. We didn't want to go in extremely biased. We didn't want to go in making a decision just because we were black, and nor was that the message that we wanted to send to the world. So we reviewed hours of testimony. We watched videos after videos and listened to witnesses, and it was difficult. And and there were many heated moments in the room, so this wasn't a situation where we all came out to immediately seek a conviction for or seek a indictment for Darren Wilson. But everyone, one thing I can say, everyone that was in the room, we looked very carefully at all of the evidence that was presented to us. And as been said before, there was a lot of focus on making sure that we were paying attention to the facts and that we weren't letting our emotional biases, come into play. So yeah, it was a difficult process.
Question. The St. Louis County Grand Jury heard testimony and deliberated over the course of 3 months or so.
Mm-hmm.
How were you able to pack that into 2 days, including your deliberations and everything? Do you feel like you made your way through everything?
I'd like to speak to that if I may, because it's a legal question. There's an assumption that McCullough and much of the national media promotes that the responsibility of the grand jury was to hear all of this testimony. It was like to inundate the people with testimony. That's not the case. McCullough himself stated that all he needed was to show probable cause, and Doran Johnson's testimony alone was enough to show probable cause. And that's what grand jurors do. So we didn't have 5,000 pages of testimony. There was no witness number 40 who spent 2 hours there. None of that occurred. We presented the evidence necessary for a reasonable, prudent group to make a determination. And I think the law does speak to a prudent person being able to make a determination that there was probable cause that a crime had been committed. So there was not 5,000 pages of inundation. That was not the case. We didn't try to overwhelm a group of people with minutia. Minutia, right. Well, inertia. That wasn't the objective. At all. So that's why McCullough could have done it in the same fashion. He could have acted legally, principally, and ethically, and he didn't. He refused to do that because he knew what the outcome was that he wanted. And it didn't, and everybody knows that a grand jury is a prosecutor's tool. Of 160,000 federal grand jurors, and we know that there's a difference in a federal grand jury and state grand jury. Of 160,000 in 2010, only 7 instances were there no indictments. Only 7. So it is a grand juror's tool. You know about the proverbial ham sandwich. Well, this was no ham sandwich that we had before us. This was an actual process that was transparent again and legal.
So basically you're saying the bottom line is you think McCullough stacked that case?
I'm not saying I think he stacked the case. I'm saying I know he stacked the case. Right. And I'm saying also that if you look at the testimony, first of all, I think it's incumbent upon all of us media people to find out what a grand jury is about. Because most people don't know what a grand jury is about, and they accept what McCullough is talking about as gospel. He is being democratic. That's what he's saying. This is a democratic process, letting people hear everything. When in the hell has a prosecutor ever done that in a grand jury? That's not his responsibility to let them hear everything. He should have been there to present evidence that a prudent person would be able to make a determination that a crime had been committed. And what the point that we're trying to make. We hope that everybody comes to the correct conclusions about what happened here. Again, this is a very transparent process that we're involved in. And we do believe that the announcement that this grand jury was going to occur set the stage for people to discover witness number 40. Set the stage for a grand juror in retrospect to determine that he did the wrong thing. And if nothing else, it seems to me, that alone says something about the significance of this process here. Given an opportunity to do what they want to do without any kind of confrontation by the people, with truth, then the lie will prevail forever. The reason we are having this discussion now is because black people step forward and say we will take our future in our own hands. We will listen to this testimony. We will bring witnesses forward, and then we will come to a conclusion that is just and transparent. That's why we can hear about Witness 40, and we can hear other things about grand jurors having discovered that Mr. McCullough misstated the case.
And if I may also add, out of this grand jury, it's ironic that you would see, in terms of so-called witnesses for Darren Wilson, being only juror 40, whereas all the other witnesses were from the community, yet he is found not guilty or no probable cause for an indictment. That speaks to the mockery of the grand jury in the first place. And also that speaks to the deep racial divide, not only here in St. Louis, but throughout the country. When you have a jury that was composed of 12, 9 being white and 3 being black, and we don't know how they voted along those lines inside of the jury anyway. So again, that speaks to the deeper issues that is not only evident with the murder of Mike Brown, but as he just mentioned, Eric Gardner, Tamar Rice, and so on, that has occurred day after day, year after year in our communities, when you find police officers who act as if they are members of the KKK, which of course was sanctioned lynchings, but we say today it's legal lynching that occurs with the killing of black people, and that must stop. And this is the great process by which we feel will be a way to move forward into the future.
I would like to make just one other statement, because I can't say how anybody else understands this process of the grand jury. I think we're so accustomed in this country to rigged processes that there may be an assumption that something was rigged about this. But I can tell you that the prosecutors waited with bated breath to coin a phrase to see what the determination of this grand jury would be. And as I understand it, of the 12, that there were 11 for the first degree murder conviction, rather indictment, and one that had another position on that. So it wasn't some slam dunk thing, and it wasn't some blind group of people, but it was a group of people who took their responsibilities very seriously and who had before them every inch of the way the law as it is written, as it is characterized for this county and this country. So this was a prevailing thing that occurred throughout this process. And I wanted to make that statement, and I think one of the grand jurors is here. I don't know if you want to say anything about your deliberations or anything like that. Yeah. Yeah. Were you the lead?
I was the foreman.
Foreman, yeah, go ahead. Say your name. So.
My name is Robert Dillard, and I was the foreman in juror number 1. And it was a difficult process, because for us, for all of us, none of us wanted to be part of the problem. None of us wanted to be, part of a system that we were protesting. We didn't want to go in extremely biased. We didn't want to go in making a decision just because we were black, and nor was that the message that we wanted to send to the world. So we reviewed hours of testimony. We watched videos after videos and listened to witnesses, and it was difficult. And there were many heated moments in the room. So this wasn't a situation where we all came out to immediately seek a conviction for, or seek a indictment for Darren Wilson. But everyone, one thing I can say, everyone that was in the room, we looked very carefully at all of the evidence that was presented to us. And as been said before, there was a lot of focus on making sure that we were paying attention to the facts and that we weren't letting our emotional biases, come into play. So yeah, it was a difficult process.
Question. The St. Louis County Grand Jury heard testimony and deliberated over the course of 3 months or so. How were you able to pack that into 2 days, including your deliberations and everything? Do you feel like you made your way through everything?
I'd like to speak to that if I may, because it's a legal question. There's an assumption that McCullough and much of the national media promotes that the responsibility of the grand jury was to hear all of this testimony. It was like to inundate the people with testimony. That's not the case. McCullough himself stated that all he needed was to show probable cause, and Doran Johnson's testimony alone was enough to show probable cause. And that's what grand jurors do. So we didn't have 5,000 pages of testimony. There was no witness number 40 who spent 2 hours there. None of that occurred. We presented the evidence necessary for a reasonable, prudent group to make a determination. And I think the law does speak to a prudent person being able to make a determination that there was probable cause that a crime had been committed. So there was not 5,000 pages of inundation. That was not the case. We didn't try to overwhelm a group of people with minutia. Minutia, right. Well, inertia. That wasn't the objective at all. So that's why McCullough could have done it in the same fashion. He could have acted legally, principally, and ethically, and he didn't. He refused to do that because he knew what the outcome was that he wanted. And it didn't, and everybody knows that a grand jury is a prosecutor's tool. Of 160,000 federal grand jurors, and we know that there's a difference in a federal grand jury and a state grand jury. Of 160,000 in 2010, only 7 instances were there no indictments. Only 7. So it is a grand juror's tool. You know about the proverbial ham sandwich. Well, this was no ham sandwich that we had before us. This was an actual process that was transparent again and legal.
So basically you're saying the bottom line is you think McCullough stacked that case?
I'm not saying I think he stacked the case. I'm saying I know he stacked the case. Right. And I'm saying also that if you look at the testimony, first of all, I think it's incumbent upon all of us media people to find out what a grand jury is about. Because most people don't know what a grand jury is about, and they accept what McCullough is talking about as gospel. He is being democratic. That's what he's saying. This is a democratic process, letting people hear everything. When the hell has a prosecutor ever done that in a grand jury? That's not his responsibility to let them hear everything. He should have been there to present evidence that a prudent person would be able to make a determination that a crime had been committed. And he didn't do that.
Bob, I think.
Yes. I have a copy of the Riverfront Times, which is one of the popular magazines here that comes out. This was the December the 25th, the 31st, 2014 edition. They have a picture of witness number 40 here, Samuel Elroy. The first interview that McCullough gave after the Michael Brown verdict, it stated the interview that he would not seek perjury charges against witness 40 or any other witnesses who offered discredited testimony. What do you think of that?
I think that first of all, it was a discredited process.
Yes.
That, you know, to assume that somehow that the witness, that McElroy, would have done something differently in the process that McCullough stacked. And I want to just say that what's really important for everybody who's seen this and heard about this, it wasn't that he did not know she was a liar. It wasn't that. He said it. He said he knew she was lying. He knew it. And he put that evidence before that grand jury. He knew it. He stated that himself. And I think that's enough for serious charges against McCullough, that he should be removed. He should be disbarred, because that's a serious ethical breach in terms of his responsibility as a lawyer. He knew that. And that did not happen with us on the 3rd and 4th. In the short period of duration that we engaged in, there was no witness number 40. There was no participation with anybody. And when those 12 people went to deliberate, I was on pins and needles wondering what kind of determination they would come back with. And one of the reasons I was because of the questions that were being asked of prosecutors by the grand jurors themselves. It was an open process, and I'm proud of it. And it was a historic process, and I'm proud of the grand jurors, and I'm proud of this community, and I think that it's been an incredible historic moment that we will see replicated throughout this country by black people who want to be free and do not want to live in communities where we have to expect that our children will die early deaths because of police actions.
Robert, can I ask you, Robert, what? Yeah.
I'm sorry, sir.
Let me ask Robert, you know, what did you take away from the evidence that you heard?
What did I take away from it?
Yeah, what did this tell you?
Well, it showed me, you know, I had, like, as been said before, I didn't go into this wanting to be the juror for the actual trial. That wasn't my place. My place was to decide if there was, again, probable cause. So what I took away from this is that there was probable cause. And that while I don't know all of the facts, and what we do know is that there was sufficient testimony to support that there should at least be a trial, where at that point, all of the facts should come out. And I think it's kind of interesting because I think one thing that's commonly forgotten is that the indictment is not to say whether or not this gentleman was guilty. And it's only fair to Darren Wilson as well to have his fair day in court. So what was most important to me was that everyone had a fair day in court. Not only the victims in this particular case, but Darren Wilson as well. And that's what I personally was invested in saying, that everyone had a fair day in court.
So it was 11-1 to indict for first degree?
Yes.
What was the one?
It wasn't, well, I won't say exact, because that juror isn't here, and I don't want to talk too much about that, but what I can say is this. I will say that the one really wanted there to be some sort of representation for you know, I don't want to put words in his mouth, you know, so I really don't want to go too deep into that, but I can say that it was a very contentious debate in the room, and like my brother said before, this was not a slam dunk, and I'm just happy that we all came to a conclusion, you know, the 11 of us, that there was probable cause for an indictment.
Did he go for or against the indictment?
He was for an indictment, yes.
But a lesser charge?
Yes.
So I have a question for you. You've been out kind of on the front lines with a lot of the protests and the movement. It seems like kind of the violence and some of the protests have died down in the last week and a half or so. What impact, if any, do you see this decision having on that and the peace within the community?
This is an ongoing effort to bring justice. You may not have seen, the consistency of the demonstrations, but again, they have been there, and there's been a number of demonstrations over the holidays. This is not going away. The wound is real deep. As mentioned earlier, there have been a number of other shootings subsequently after the killing of Mike Brown. So this community is far from being united per how people try to project it. We are determined to deal with the underlying issues that impact our community, and that is police terrorism. That is the disproportionate number of white officers in our community. It is in terms of how those same white officers view our communities. Those are the deeper issues, along with the judicial system that allows the many instances of brutality. And also at our grand jury, we gave a historical background all the way back to Marilyn Banks, a young of terrorism in our community. in many instances of our people being victimized by the police. So this is far from ended. In fact, if it's not out of character right at this moment, there's going to be a major march on Clayton that Leadership for Justice Coalition will be hosting on January the 31st. So no, this has not ended, and it will continue in terms of the fight for justice.
I want to say just a couple of other things, and I want to express appreciation to all of you for being here and for your patience. But as it has been said, we see the Black People's Grand Jury as offering some kind of direction for a spontaneous movement that has seen a rapid radicalization of African people throughout this country. In fact, it is the most political motion by ordinary Black people that we've seen for the last 2 generations, subsequent to the assassinations of King and Malcolm X, the destruction of the Black Panther Party and many other organizations that existed in this country. And we've seen this rapid radicalization, but not necessarily a kind of political clarity and direction. We think that the Black People's Grand Jury offers some direction. It says that we have to have self-determination. We have to be in charge of our own affairs. Beyond that, subsequent to the decision made by the heroic jurors, we had further discussion with the audience after the proceeding was over. And we talked about the absolute need for this movement to move toward Black community control of the police. That if there are going to be police in our community, if there are going to be people in our community sanctioned by law to be able to kill, then they should be under the leadership, they should be under the control of the community itself. We say they should live in the community, that they should have the same stakes in the community as everyone else. They should not be an invading force that comes to this community only looking for trouble that they call crime. That they should assume concern for all the contradictions, not just what they call crime, but for the joblessness, for the unemployment, for the poor health, that they should be actual servants of the people, that they should have these things removed, this war gear that they wear, the black outfits and ski masks that are used to intimidate a population, to treat our community as a colonial, colonized, subject people that have to be victimized by these colonial outsiders who function as terrorists. That the people must control the police. That is a democratic response. There's some suggestion that there is a quandary about how we can solve this problem. Should we have cameras? Should there be dialogue around race around the country? Should there be what they call police review boards, giving us an opportunity to review what the police has already done? We say no, that there should be black community control of the police. That has to be the message. We train them, we hire them, we fire them, we determine their mission, the policies in our communities. And that is a democratic response. The people have the right to control the guns in their community. So that I've heard, I've never seen it, but I've heard that in white communities, police are helpful in taking cats out of trees and helping the little ladies across the street. We'd like to see something like that in our community as well. And we believe that black community control of the police will allow for there to be a police organization that the people feel secure with, that we see is there to provide for the people instead of acting as some kind of terrorist entity that comes in to occupy our community at will and then go someplace else to live without any kind of consequences or responsibility to the community. I want to, we can, this one, and then we'll close it down. Yes.
Okay, under the American legal system, do you feel that Darren Wilson legal had legal process under the colored grand jury, also up under the black people grand jury.
Do I, wait, I'm sorry.
His due process.
Under the American legal system, do we feel
that he received under Bob McCullough grand jury and also up under the black.
I think, as the young brother grand juror said, in many ways, you can say that Darren Wilson was done a disservice by Bob McCullough, because everybody I know thinks he did it. And the way to have found out for sure whether he did it was to have gone to trial. An indictment would have taken him to trial. All the evidence could have been weighed in a very public, transparent process, and he could have defended himself in a good way. But this tainted thing that McCullough did, then there's no matter the fact that he was rewarded by the white population with, understand, perhaps up to $1 million, so this golden parachute retirement, they call it resignation, but it's clearly a retirement. Despite the fact that he's been rewarded for that, he's going to live for as long as he does, just like Zimmerman, George Zimmerman. Everybody knows he murdered Trayvon. He's going to have to live with that. And with the fact that the whole world knows that he's a murderer. And, but he could have had an opportunity. He could have walked into this door. He could have sat down before this black people's grand jury. And he could have said, this is what happened. And people would have had an opportunity to actually ask him questions. He was not even questioned in a serious way in the white people's grand jury. I want to thank everybody so much for coming out, and turn it back over to Sister Kenethia from St. Louis International People's Democratic World Movement. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yes, again, thank you so much for the press coming out and members of the community coming out, and for this historical presentation of the decision of the Black People's Grand Jury. I would like to extend to anyone interested in joining us in this struggle to be able to contact the International People Democratic Uhuru Movement local branch membership at uhuruferguson@gmail.com, or you can give us a call at 314-643-6519. Thank you.